Right, good afternoon. It is a pleasure to welcome two international media scholars to Penn State on behalf of the Center for Global Studies in the College of Liberal Arts and the Institute for Information Policy housed in the College of Communication and ISD. I would like to introduce Dr. Sunetra Sen Narayan first. She is one of our own. She received her PhD from Penn State from the College of Communication in 1999. In fact, her doctoral advisor is right here, Dr. Nichols. Thereafter, she has been a faculty member at the Indian Institute of Mass Communication in New Delhi, which is one of the primary centers for mass communication education and research in India. She has specialized in development communication and in mass media studies, and she was the editor for The Communicator, as well as the author of two well-regarded books. The most recent one is India Connected, Mapping the Impact of New Media, which was published by Sage Publications in 2016. Dr. Shalini Narayanan is equally eminent. She has been a professor at the Indian Institute of Mass Communication as well. But prior to that, she has got about 25 years of experience working in the Indian media industries, especially in Doordarshan, which is the national television carrier, as well as in DAVP, the Directorate of Audio-Visual Publicity for the Government of India. At the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, she was responsible for training media professionals for various departments in government. She too is co-editor with Sunetra of the India Connected book that was published in 2016. So please join me in welcoming both Sunetra and Shalini to Penn State.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And we sort of divide the presentation amongst ourselves. But before I start, I must place on record my gratitude to the Center for Global Studies, Professor Sophia McLennan, Sarah, and Mary, and Emily from the center, and Professor Jayakar from the Institute for Information Policy for inviting us here and giving us this opportunity. I'll just I'll just give you an introduction to what we are going to talk about. But first and foremost, here's a hello from India. Why should you be looking at India when it comes to new media? Today we had an opportunity to take some classes in other departments, and we found that even to place India geographically was a bit of a challenge for a lot of students. And our purpose in coming here is to sensitize everybody on how well India is doing when it comes to new media and what are the opportunities for America there. So if you look at it percentage-wise, the USA is a red block and yellow is India. So as a population, as a percentage of the population, there is some difference. But if you look at the internet penetration as a percentage of the population, you see that America is like almost 90% connected via the internet, whereas India is somewhere around 36%. And when you go on to social media usage as a percentage of the population, again there's a similar kind of trend, with India being even further behind at 19%. But if you look at the absolute numbers, this is what it looks like. Our population is like 1.28 billion at the moment, and I think America has a population of somewhere around 323 or 343, I'm forgetting the exact figure. And in absolute numbers, even though as a percentage the USA is so high there, but when it comes to absolute numbers, we we absolutely, we're ahead of the US when it comes to the sheer numbers involved. And even when it comes to social media users, numbers-wise, we're almost equivalent. To just take this argument and to take it through some fun statistics about India. Yes, this is the most popular of the lot. We do have more mobile phones in the country than toilets. And that's why the Prime Minister has started this movement called Swachh Bharat or Clean India. And we have an entire department looking to make India open defecation free. I mean, let's not go there, but so. Yes, another fun fact, you have more English speakers in India than even the United Kingdom. Numbers are our forte, so. That is where we differ from China. Numbers-wise, China is, of course, bigger than us, but English is one area where we excel at, and we are also open to other platforms from other countries, which China is not. And just recently, in July 2017, we overtook the US in terms of numbers of users on Facebook. So we are now 241 million people on Facebook in India, and in the US you have 240 million people who are there on Facebook. If you look at our leaders' profiles on social media platforms, Prime Minister Modi has 43 million fans on Facebook, and President Trump has 24 million. Of course, on Twitter, President Trump is a little ahead at almost 40 million, but we are not too far behind with 35 million for our Prime Minister. Just another way to look at it. Superstar Rajnikant, his film Kabali actually got 34 million views on YouTube, and Bahubali received 24 million. And for a comparison, if you look at Star Wars The Force Awakens, you see that it's got 22 million views. So what are the kind of other media that are there in India? Just to give you a context of what you're talking about. So we have some number like 883 television channels that are permitted in India, out of which 388 only are news channels. So it's like a huge media industry there. You have Doordarshan is our state-owned broadcaster, television broadcaster. It has 34 channels. When it comes to private radio stations, you have 245 FM radio stations in India. Whereas All India Radio or Akashvani is our national broadcaster in radio, and that has around 250 stations. Community radio stations number around 200. And the number of newspapers or periodicals is what is astounding. That's where we are growing, in fact. Whereas world over, the trend is for a recession in for a decline in the number of people reading newspapers and periodicals. But in India, it's growing. Partly the reason is because publications in India are moving towards the regional, the vernacular, and the regional papers are doing much better because literacy levels are growing in the regions. So that's the kind of vibrant media we have. So what are we going to cover today? So like I said, we are going to aim to situate the growth of new media in India on the world stage, and we'll try and study its current and projected growth. We'll also talk about the theoretical underpinnings of new media and how it impacts us in India. We'll then take you through some issues that are of concern, not only for India, but for countries across the world. Of course, we don't have any solution, but we'll talk about the problems. And we'll conclude with our thoughts on the phenomenon of new media in India and what lessons it can hold for other countries. And our presentation is largely based on our co-edited book, Interconnected, and you'll find other sources such as reports by We Are Social or industry bodies in India and NASSCOM, which is a not-for-profit industry body. And we'll try and conclude the presentation 15 minutes before the scheduled time to allow for questions. But again, hopefully no tough questions. So to give you an overview of the world as such and how new media is spread across the globe, we can see that there are half the world, more than that, is actually having access to the internet. But out of all those who have internet access, not everybody is onto social media. So around 80% of those who are on the internet are actually accessing social media. And those who are using social media, around 92% are accessing it through the mobile. Not through the laptop, but the mobile. And yeah, I know in the US, I think everybody is having an Apple phone, iPhone, but the world, 3/4 of the world is actually using the Android platform. And in India, I think that's the majority share too. And if you look at the world, the growth of internet penetration across the world, you'll find that the Asia-Pacific region is actually where the growth is very high. APAC accounts for more than half the world's digital users and accounts for 70% of the total growth in global internet users as of last year. And most of this growth is coming from South and Southeast Asia. So when we say South, India is part of that. This is how it looks as of August 2017. You have 7.5 billion people in the world, out of which 3.8 billion are online, out of which 3.028 billion are using social media, and through you have mobile users who are the unique mobile users are around 5 billion, and those who are using social media through mobiles account for around 2.7 billion. So just to give a comparison, this is what the numbers look like in India. Actually, the number of mobile users in India crossed the 1 billion mark 2 years back. But given the people who are, if you take out people who are owning more than one SIM, if you identify the unique users, the number comes to only around 734 million. So these are the trends that are ruling in India. This is actually correct. Between 2000 and 2015, the growth rate of internet use in India went up by nearly 7,000%. And like I said, we have around 241 million people on Facebook, but less than a quarter of these users are women. Which means there is a gender disparity in the way we are using the internet. The missed call phenomenon, I don't know whether you're aware of it here. In India, what happens is, like, if you run out of balance on your phone and you want somebody to call you, you give that person a missed call. So that person calls you back so that you don't spend the money. So that's how most of the users who are from the low income, they get around the barrier of not having enough money for talking. So this figure here, the most popular prepaid recharge in India is 10 rupees. 10 rupees you can actually recharge your phone to make it, at least you can give missed call. So you're good to go. So in the coming years, all the reports say that from the cities, the internet users are going to sort of come more from the rural areas, and they are more likely to be female, they're likely to be older, and more vernacular. And by 2021, language users, or people using regional languages in India, they're likely to touch 536 million. And when you compare it to English users, it's like 199 million only. I don't really want to spend time on this particular slide, but just to give you an overview, BSNL was a government-owned entity which introduced internet in India in 1995, and as you can see, the progress over the years. The Indian government actually was quick enough to pass the IT Act in 2000, and one of the biggest entities of the Indian government, the Railways, which had set up the irctc.com, which was the one which made online ticketing possible, and it's a huge, huge thing for India. And then by 2004, BSNL, which is another public body, also introduced broadband. Orkut was there in 2005. But when Facebook came in 2006, Orkut actually died a painful, slow death. Twitter made its debut in 2007, and so we had this, because India, the government recognizes the importance of the regional languages. So that's where you can see that, as well as the private entities also recognize that. So in 2007 itself, Google News was launched in Hindi. In 2009, Government of India had put up a draft policy on Indian languages. I'll share with you how that figure is important. Why is it important to look at the regional language market in India? That's in the later slide. So, so you have Flipkart, which comes in 2013. 2014 is when the new government, the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is right to center, that government came into power, and immediately after taking over, this particular government has given a lot of importance to social media and to new media in India. So the Digital India project was launched immediately after, and TRAI took some very good decisions for the consumers in 2016. So according to NASSCOM, the projections are that by 2021, this is how it's going to look. So this figure, 75% of new internet users will consume content in local language. This is where we are focusing. And of course, when we say local languages, mostly it's the regions or rural areas. So that is also mobile video content. That's another important area. It seems a little counterintuitive, but the lower you go down the income hierarchy, the lower you go, you find there's a thirst for more video content, and whereas they don't have access to good connectivity, but thirst is there because the literacy levels are low. So video content makes better sense to people in that bracket. So it's expected to grow at something like 83% CAGR in the next 5 years. Okay, I'll request Dr. Snehitra to take over and talk about the next.
So that's the kind of broad frame of reference as to where India stands in terms of old media and in terms of new media. It's interesting to see that in the span of 50 years, we became free in 1947, but in the span of 50 years from 1950 to about 2000, the reach of all legacy media, that is print, radio and TV, went up from 15% to 65%. But mobiles make a debut in around, they enter India in the late 1990s, but between the decade 2000 to 2010 or 12 thereabouts, we have mobiles which move virtually from very low numbers to 800 plus million. So that whole trajectory of reach has been compressed into 1 decade, which happened with older media in 5 decades. So it's interesting to see how things are becoming accelerated when it comes to new media, impacts, trajectories, everything is at a much faster pace. So it's really a challenge. How do you look at? I remember even my thesis, Professor Nichols is here. He did ask me, well, what's the theory of why television has been liberalized and it's become this huge force in around 1990? Well, you know, similar things are happening with new media in India today, and it's as difficult to theorize because the volume of change is so large. It's so macro in terms of the number of people who are getting on either a mobile or getting onto the net, or it's also very large in the increase in time that people are spending with their mobile phones or getting onto the net. So there's both macro and micro level changes. And it's very hard to say, okay, this theory fits what's happening, because there are multiple things that are happening, and different slices of theories might fit one aspect or two aspects, but it's really hard to look at it overall something, you know. So we just look at some of the things that are happening, and we'll see what can what can explain things. So in India, we're seeing the rise of online communities, just like we are in different parts of the world. Sometimes they're connected to physical communities, sometimes they are not. A lot has been said about politics, political participation, the public sphere, how the virtual public sphere is going to reignite politics, how it's going to change governance, development. So I mean, everything is being claimed. So if you are, if you're an optimist, you can say, and a lot of the subtext of even politician speeches are that, you know, new media can cure everything. Every development ill in India can be cured by giving them a mobile or a laptop or a tablet or whatever. So if you're an optimist, you can believe that it's democratizing, you can break old hierarchies of class, you can break stereotypes of gender. However, if you're a little critical of some of the things that have recently even happened in India, even though lots has been claimed in terms of progress, then you can say that there are also new problems which are surfacing, which are very much on the public agenda, even including judicial activism on the notion of privacy and the right to privacy, which new media has really thrown up again in very prominent light. We also have problems with hate speech, violence, pornography, criminal activities such as cyber fraud, identity theft. This is all against the backdrop of the government of India wanting to push a very large kind of social security number scheme. It's called Aadhaar. So lots of people are for it, lots of people are against it. It has pros and cons, but it's very much on the, it's in the courts. There isn't even litigation against it that's ongoing. So, of course, new media means, again, we're looking at active audience theories. That's true for India as well. Some of the politicians speak in newspapers or TV channels. They talk about, global village. So that's, again, older idea. A lot of the marketing or business kind of literature looks at diffusion of how fast is an app diffusing, or how fast are people adopting a certain, even getting onto e-commerce or whatever, because that has marketing implications. That's again diffusion of innovations kind of thing. Then information society, how do we theorize it? Yes, it has a Penn State connect. And lastly, some of the work post 2005 talks about the importance of global networks. When we start with the statistic that more Indians on Facebook than in the US, where we are integrating with some form of a global social media, that is a kind of a global network. So do we look at something like that? One view that has come out of anthropological research in the spread of the cell phone in India, which gives some valuable cultural insights, is that new media is a disruptive force. Jeffrey and Doron did a very good study of this phenomenon of the spread and the craze for getting cell phones in India, and how people are using it, and how it's changing maybe traditional ways of thought, because even new media has kind of disrupted the hierarchies of some of them of patriarchy. For example, women weren't encouraged to be early adopters of mobile phones, especially in low-income areas. A man would get it, or a boy would get it, a girl would not. In some rural communities, women were actually forbidden from owning mobile phones. So something like this, when it's becoming more and more widespread, it's giving women to access to information which they didn't have. Even rural women are using mobiles, free social messaging service called WhatsApp, free if you have Wi-Fi. So it's breaking those, and also hierarchies of age. Earlier, because we are a conservative society, there was an accepted norm for talking to elders or talking to people who are in positions of authority. The mobile phone has changed how people interact. Today, even WhatsApp is being used in a semi-official capacity by government officials and government websites to reach out to people. So that's a more horizontal way of communicating. You're less likely to be hierarchical on WhatsApp than you are in an official letter to, say, a government department. So things are changing, and partly it's due to technology. If you look at the whole globalization literature, which I don't want to spend too much time on because it's just part of it, it's that we are also integrating with that global social networks. What's happening in the rest of the world is also happening in India, but in a different form. So it's maybe globalization, because and the media is a very large part of that. The other hand, if you look at see, India is so vast, it's so diverse, there's so many languages, so much content, that you can again make the case that everything that is happening in a unique way. In a particular village, people use media like this. In another village, 100 miles away, people don't. So you can also make the case that, well, not one theory fits, so it's like you have to look at very local slices and see what's the context. Perhaps one thing that could connect all these things is that, the view that technology and society is a bi-directional thing. I think that's more the case of India, that technology is there, but so is society. Social uses also determine what technology is picked up, what technology spreads, but technology again also finds users. So it's one is influencing the other. It's not technological determinism, I don't think, the case of India. So why are we seeing such high rates of adoption, even in a country where still officially 1/4 the population is poor, below the poverty line, and by slightly higher index, 1/3 the population is poor? Still, we are finding, even if you take the unique figures, between 700 to 800 million telephones. So there are people who you can argue they may not be getting enough food, but they would still have a mobile phone. And to start with that funny statistic, we don't have enough toilets, but we have enough telephones. So that is a development dilemma, and what does it mean to us? Obviously, people want a telephone, even more than a toilet, or even more, So some of the supply side factors is to look at the trajectory of new media in the last decade or more than that. You have to first see that the Indian economy was a closed kind of economy, but it was really liberalized in 1990. So there were 20 years of economic reforms and liberalizing the economy, which predated the boom in new media. And before that, there was a boom in old media, because television became liberalized in 1990 along with the economy. So people got used to consuming a lot of content. Before that, there was one Doordarshan, one government channel, and one point of view with very little imported programming. Suddenly, there's a boom. You get voices from everywhere. You get a boom not only in, not even so much foreign programming. You get local programming in regional languages, which has swept the nation. Everybody wants to watch their soap opera in their own language, and that's what happened post-1990. Against that background, we find also the liberalization of the telecom sector, where government policy allowed liberalization to happen. In fact, it started with duopoly in most of the bigger cities. So we find the government policy is pushing towards opening up, because there's a lot of demand for telephones. The old landline telephone just wasn't enough, because there were long waiting lists. People wanted to use them, but they couldn't. So there were kiosks with telephones in various marketplaces where you could go to make a phone call if you didn't have your own telephone. But that's a very bad way to connect. So obviously there was a hunger, there was a demand, and it was liberalizing allowed that thing to become possible. So infrastructure came along. Devices at the beginning, when mobile phones first entered India, they were often Nokia. They were not cheap by any means. I remember the first mobile we had in our family cost about 6,000 to 7,000 rupees, and that was in early 2001, I think, or maybe 2002, which is not cheap. Today you can get a smartphone which functions for as little as maybe 2,000 rupees. It would have internet connectivity, it would have, so that's the fall in price of your basic phone. And the phone, the clunky Nokia in 2000 was not a smartphone, it was basically just for voice and SMS. So today our calling costs are some of the lowest in the world. So that's one more reason why people want to connect. We also have a very good IT sector. It's a functioning part of the economy. It contributes a lot to the services sector. So it helps generally for this sector to be vibrant. But what about people? What do they want mobiles for? Initially they wanted it for browsing. It was the novelty factor. Well, what is this thing called the internet? I remember when I applied to Penn State in 1993 maybe to enroll in a master's program here. I didn't know what the Masters in Telecom meant, and yet I applied for it, and it's amazing that I got selected for the program. I can say this now 20 years later. I thought it meant television, because we didn't know what telecommunications was except from an engineering viewpoint. So I wrote the statement of purpose, all the time thinking that telecom meant a television, and yet I got selected, so that's amazing. The other thing was, I remember when I applied to Penn State, it was like poking a pin in a map, because we didn't have internet. I had a cousin in Philadelphia, and I called her up and said, well, what's this place, State College, is it okay? She said, well, it's all right, it's like 4 hours from Philly, I suppose you can come, it's safe. And that's how I came, because there was no internet, there was no way of knowing what this place was really. And today I think my son applied for a master's in England this year, and he knew down to what classes he would take, which day he would take, which hostel he would be staying in, what was the meal plan or whatever. So so in that sense, the internet has changed the way we live. Even, in my personal capacity, I see the change. It was a great unknown in 1994. I remember I used to write for a Hong Kong-based magazine, and they asked me, can you send your articles online? So I remember writing back, what is online? I used to physically type my articles and send them by courier to Hong Kong, which used to cost 1,000 rupees in those days. So, things have changed. The amount of change we've witnessed in our own lifetime is incredible. So browsing is what led the early demand. There's a novelty factor. What's this thing called the internet? Then, of course, email. People love to connect in India as they do in other parts of email, chatting. Today, e-commerce is a big driver, and Dr. Narayanan is going to be talking about it. It's a revolution sweeping India in commerce. Today, a lot of services are delivered in the e-mode, and that's much more convenient than physically queuing up to pay bills, etc. And also, we are finding explosion of content in our own languages, which is again a big driver. Because people who aren't very highly educated, they prefer to use their own language rather than English, because English is often a second language in India. So that's some of the reasons why. And today you can get low-cost smartphones which work, which connect. So most of the connectivity to the internet in the next 5 years, already in India, and in the next 5 years, the trajectory is going to be not through the computer, but through the low-cost smartphone. And also phones, in some sense, are getting easier to use than they were because a lot of the icons are now visual as compared to the earlier phones. Shalini, would you like to talk about politics? Now we've sort of, that's the kind of background to why people are wanting to purchase phones or get onto the internet. And now we're looking at a few areas, politics, social movements, governance, a little bit because limitations of time also there. We want to keep some time for questions, so politics and social movements.
So we have about half an hour for the presentation, I guess, so I'll just quickly take you through what we have thought about to discuss with you. So how can new media actually influence the political process? So what we, from studies, what we've seen is that that it can lower barriers to entry to the political process to groups who do not hold power. This is true in India too. But let me put it this way, we don't have conclusive studies, but this is the direction that most studies have shown. And this actually has been a very, at least in India, I can testify that this is how political messaging is going around. Entertainment was a big format which was used in the last elections in Uttar Pradesh, the central state in India. We had this messaging which was actually political, which came in the form of cartoons which were forwarded on WhatsApp, and they made the candidates appear funny, and people forwarded those messages without taking into account the political content because just because they were so funny. So that seemed to have had quite an impact on the way the decision turned out towards the end. Personalization of a political campaign with direct engagement. That's another facet of the impact that new media can have. In fact, our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, actually used this platform of social media very well during the general elections in 2014. And when he took the oath of office, he had more than 16 million Facebook likes, which was second most for any politician in the world. And first most, I think all of you could probably guess, was President Obama. So yeah, Mr. Modi was second only to him. So studies have shown that that the public sphere could be made more democratic through the use of new media by increasing participation from citizens, because it is one of the few ways which allow for one of the few media which allow for two-way participation and dialogue also. And lack of access to new media can exacerbate the gap. So we will come to the digital divide later on, which Dr. Sumitra will talk about. This, I think, is one point where the traditional media was the gatekeeping and agenda functions of traditional media are getting a little diluted with new media coming in. And like in yesterday's class, we were discussing some of the ways in which you can actually bring about policy change in countries across the world. Could also, new media could be an important factor in there also, because of these two factors. And so we anticipate that for the diffusion of new media in India could create scope for more voices and increase levels of public participation. There's this element of caste in India. I think all of you here in the audience would probably understand that. So there was this feeling that traditional media was not giving space to them. But with the coming of online media, you find a lot of the castes that were not getting space in the traditional sphere. They have their own new media platforms which don't cost anything, and are very widely popular among them. So people who are dispossessed of a voice, of course the contrary can also be argued, but at the moment studies are indicating that this new media could be responsible for adding more voices to the discussion in the public sphere. If you have access to social media, individuals feel very empowered, and they feel that they are able to actively participate in political movements, and online activity can increase offline political participation. And there are two theories that are listed here, which basically show how collective action can be impacted through new media. The resource mobilization theory and the social information processing theory. This explains how people process information which is received through online interaction. The social information processing theory believes that it's more or less the way people react to information received online is as they would in a face-to-face conversation. However, censorship, manipulation of user data, as well as the digital divide could actually undermine what a role new media could play in social movements. And of course, media use may not be enough as a singular factor, which everybody is aware of probably. So, but it does have the potential to promote diversification and a democratic culture, even in authoritarian regimes.
So that's a little bit about politics. We are hearing a lot, especially from the current government, about how governance is going to change with digital India and digital this and digital what. But actually, the idea that we could have e-forms of governance is a little older than this government, and there have been ways in which it has been pushed to improve administration of different government departments, to improve delivery of e-services, and also to build e-communities which help to give feedback into, to make it a more participatory kind of development mode. Because the old paradigm of government was that, government is sort of stands by itself and tells the people this is what you should do. So the approach to governance is actually helping to get feedback to streamline governance, to make it more responsive. And in a country where there are large levels of poverty, even now, it's particularly important to target limited resources to solve problems which are more dire than others. So there's a lot of data on, there's a lot of projects running which have a e-approach to governance in India. There are just too many, so I won't really go into them. But just mention, we have a national e-governance plan. There are a lot of old projects which are running, some as long as over 10 years. There is the important national telecom policy, after which there was this idea that the village panchayats is the local governing council at the village level. So it was decided that 250,000 of these village level administrative councils, they're called panchayats, they would be linked up via fiber optic loops, basically to get every village on the net so that for administrative purposes. But that is not proceeding at the rate at which it should. It's much slower than, it's only about 80,000, instead of 250,000. So these are just examples of some of the, for example, all the land records were put online. This was a huge success. So what does this kind of e-administration do? It basically makes government more transparent, more responsive, it reduces corruption, and it helps to target scarce resources. So all that is happening with various degrees of success in India. But something like new media has thrown up a lot of problems for regulation, which if you follow the Indian currently 2 or 3 big cases, even as as late as last month, which took on Aadhaar, the social security. This scheme was originally not even proposed by the Bharatiya Janata Party government. It was proposed by the earlier government. It was actually one of the reasons why it was proposed is that a lot of poverty redressal mechanisms were. It was called the public food distribution system. That is basically a kind of to give low-income people access to cheap food through ration shops. That food was not reaching the people who actually it was meant to target, because the middleman would just take it away, they would sell it off, and every time the poor person went with a ration card to that shop, they were told, well, the rice is finished, or the wheat is finished, or the oil didn't come. So it was a huge scam in many ways, and the targeted, a lot of money was being spent, it wasn't reaching the poor people. So one of the things they decided to do was to create this unique identification system where people could get ration cards with biometric, and so that nobody could take away their quota of food and all that. But the mandate of this has been spread, so now there's a lot of cases which look at is the state going to use it for surveillance. So those kind of arguments that we've had in other countries earlier, we're seeing unravel in India right now. And recently there's been judicial activism which has upheld that right to privacy is a fundamental right. You would be aware in India we don't have a First Amendment kind of explicit proviso for freedom of speech, but we do believe in freedom of speech, and it is there under Article 19A, I think, of our Constitution, but it's not worded like your First Amendment. So there was a huge hue and cry that, Aadhaar is going to invade our privacy, and there's been a lot of civil society movement against it, but then the government is claiming that it will have benefits with, for the poor people and so on. So that's an ongoing discussion right now. We have a very huge television sector. We're having new rather than go through this whole laundry list of regulating different media. Perhaps we can just look at the difference between how media is regulated in the US and India is that we don't have an FCC-like body. So in a scenario where you're having when technology is changing so fast, it's always a challenge how to regulate it. And we don't have like one umbrella body with one body for carriage and one for content. So there's a lot of confusion when technology throws up novel social problems, data theft or invasion of privacy, surveillance. How are these going to be regulated? So that kind of argument it's very much alive in India right now. Different bills are there which have looked at different aspects, but we do not have an overall. We have a telecom regulatory authority of India which looks into issues relating to the telecom sector, including interconnectivity, interoperability, spectrum, so on. But it doesn't. We don't really have that kind of cohesion between content and carriage, which you do because you have one FCC. So. While at various points the Press Council and different parliamentary committees have suggested a single regulatory body, it's not happened. The Press Council looks into print, and the Press Council is more like a toothless body, it doesn't really have power to enforce. So even in the old media there are problems, and now you have to that mix you add with convergence, how everything is happening on, like, say, one handset. How do you regulate that? So new media regulation has been based on some acts, some of which date from colonial times. For example, the Telegraph Act of 1885. It was amended as recently as 2004 to take into account, issues relating to mobile phones. So it's a colonial act. It pertains to telegraph, but the ambit of the telegraph was extended to take into account mobile telephony. And we have also an old wireless telegraphy act. Again, this dates from colonial times. We have a more modern cable television network which looks at issues related to the cable sector. Then we have the TRAI Act, where the Telecom Regulatory Authority, which is working reasonably well. It was set up in 1990. Other than this, we also had the Prasar Bharati Act, which was set up to look at the public service broadcaster. And we have the Information Technology Act, and but it's a very much evolving scenario, regulation in India. We've had problems of people getting arrested for Facebook posts and whatnot, and there was a lot of anger against that. So by and large, it's very difficult, although it can happen, but it's not something that the public generally approves of, that people are being arrested for fairly innocuous statements and whatnot. So the same old problems of the rights of individual vis-a-vis society, but that's very active debate in India right now, especially with this thing over Aadhaar. How India has responded vis-a-vis content that it feels is offensive on sites such as Facebook is they ask the Facebook administrator to just take down that content. And interestingly enough, I think India is the country which has asked for most takedown of content. I think over time, maybe in the current scenario also, there's an exaggerated sense of what could offend somebody else's sensibilities. So earlier, whereas a lot could be said in humor against another community or another maybe caste, today it's not that easy to say it anymore, because there's a lot of outrage that especially the Hindu majority sensibilities could be outraged and things like that. So that is, we're finding more and more. So these are some of the things. I think the Supreme Court has been fairly activist in the last couple of cases. So that has changed things. But still problems remain. While we talk about, this euphoric approach to new media, everybody has a phone, everybody's getting online, 1/3 the population plus is already on the internet, in 5 years it will be 2/3. But still there are lots of problems with people cannot access the net as easily. Maybe they're too poor, maybe they live in rural areas where connectivity is not possible. Maybe they want broadband and they can't afford it. Broadband is still not very affordable, narrowband is. But I think the entry of Jio and Reliance and private networks might change broadband connectivity in future. So we find the digital divide still remains. Currently, as Shalini mentioned earlier, the people who do have connectivity currently are typically likely to be younger. They're typically more likely to be male, more likely to be living in urban areas than people who are rural or women or older or even middle-aged. So there is that, and of course high income. But there is a demand. It's not that you want it and you don't want it, which is why you're not on the net. It's typically people can't afford it for some reason. Either they can't afford the device or they can't afford the plan, even if it's a low-cost plan, because they're not. It's difficult for them. So there are different degrees of the digital divide which are prevalent in India. Some of them are simply between the rich and the poor, which is self-evident, which is there in every country. But some unique aspects of the digital divide in India is that even within states in India, certain areas have high connectivity to the net and high penetration of telephones. For example, the capital region, Delhi, it has a high tele-density, it has high number of people. But if you go to rural Bihar, very few people are actually on. So there's also a geographical aspect, there's a rural-urban aspect, and also there's a gender aspect, which Shalini will be talking more about. So when we talk about the internet as a public good, while the government is often talking about the importance of digital India and connecting everybody up, the reality is it's not been happening that fast. Partly is because this huge fiber optic plan has not happened as fast as it should have. There are problems with rights of way in the states, with digging along highways. So what is planned and what is executed and implemented are often two different things. So while it's recognized, the value of being on the net is recognized officially by the government of India, it's not happening so fast on the ground. So this is the project to link to 25 million panchayats, but only 80,000, 80 million, sorry, 0.8 million. I'm still thinking in lakhs, so unit is different. But still the government has done quite a lot. I'd say it's quite effective in e-services delivery in many areas. It's also pushing things such as the Smart Cities project, but that is also with fairly limited success, I would say. So maybe Shalini would like to discuss the gender aspects of the digital divide.
Yeah, so like for women who go online, actually they have two issues. First and foremost, getting online, getting access to the internet, and the other is the abuse they face online. India is mostly a patriarchal society. Women stepping out of the house, women taking decisions on their own, those are really frowned upon still. So when this same offline habits continue online, so we have a number of cases where we have journalists who are popular journalists who are women. When they are online, they get trolled, they'll get a lot of abuse. And the abuse is more for women than for men in India. So these are the two major areas that we are looking at. And in India, if there is a choice to give a phone in the house, it'll probably go to the boy rather than to the girl. My grandfather runs a school in his own village, and I happened to visit there. So all the women told me that they have phones. So I said, okay, show me what kind of phone are you using? They said that we have the phone, but it's for safekeeping. It's with my husband or with my brother. So if I want it, I can always ask for it. But they don't actually have unfettered access. A similar kind of story is recorded by Jeffrey and Doron in their book. And they were actually studying these boatmen in the ghats of Varanasi or Benares. And in those families also, like the daughter-in-law comes into a house, her natal family gives her a telephone so that they can communicate with her. But when she enters the in-law's place, the mother-in-law takes over the phone and says, if you need it, you can always ask me for it, and it doesn't really happen. So those kind of issues are there. There have been instances when all the women in a village have been asked to not use phones, like it happened last year in February in Mehsana district. They said that they could not, that no woman should be allowed to use a phone. Similar kind of orders have come off and on from various areas of the country. And they say that if a woman is given a phone, then there will be moral corruption. She'll be talking to unknown men. So that will affect the honor of the family. And if she has a phone, she might get tempted to go out. And she goes out with a man, then again the family's honor gets affected. And so that will lead to an increase in crimes against women. So she should not be given a phone. Even those women who are online are using social media. Even there you see the disparity, that less than a quarter of those who are using Facebook today are women. And so what happens is there's another kind of marginalization that they suffer when women go online in India. They have to constantly battle to preserve and protect their right to public space. But this is true again for other media also, and in general. So I'd say that there is a kind of a parity online and offline on how women are being treated in India. It's not that it's a new phenomenon that they are facing. We've had a number of cases where women have been trolled extensively, and I'm not really going into them, but there are sufficient number of cases to really take the phenomenon of trolling quite seriously. There have been instances when government-supported trolls have also been in action, which probably we should not be discussing here. But there's a book by a journalist which actually details how even governments support trolling activities. Not only against women, of course, but anybody who stands against their ideology. So before we end, I think we just take a look at the problem of fake news. This is really an issue that really is causing a lot of concern in government circles. This in fact is so prevalent in India that Facebook came out with a campaign which was in the print media. They have full-page advertisements which actually tell users of Facebook that this is what you should look out for. How can you spot fake news? How should you be? What you should be aware of when you are sharing stories on Facebook. So media literacy not being very high in India, it's very easy to spread rumors. As you were discussing yesterday, there was this rumor very recently in the state of Haryana that there was somebody who was going around cutting women's hair off in the night. And I mean, it sounds absurd to us, but it was enough for people to actually take the complaint to bureaucrats, to policemen, and they said, because it was felt that hair could be used for some kind of occult practices. So the local name given was Choti Katwa, where is somebody who chops off your brain, your plant. So women were afraid to sleep outside. Of course, it was not a factual phenomenon. It was, people said it was actually a kind of mass hysteria that was created. But there have been other instances which are not, which don't sound as humorous, but in fact they've had very severe consequences. We've had, in Jharkhand, there was this rumor circulating that child lifters are at large. And if you see anybody you don't recognize in your area who seems to be loitering without purpose, you please beware, because they could take your child away. So that kind of rumor was circulating mostly through WhatsApp, and such phenomena have happened at regular, quite some frequency in India. So in this particular instance, 7 people lost their lives because people were scared of outsiders who were roaming around, and they felt nervous that what if this is correct. So the villagers got hold of anybody loitering and they killed them. 7 of them were lynched to death. So, so that was a kind of impact an online fake item could have, on your offline and your real world also. So you have there are tons of examples of this. In fact, in 2012, there was an entire mass exodus of people belonging to the northeast of India. Like the states in the northeast of India, the people who are there, they look racially different from the rest of the population. They have more, what is it called, Mongoloid features, and they look different from the rest of the population. So it's easy to identify them. So a lot of them were working in the southern states. There also this rumor was circulating that please don't step out of your house. You'll be killed if you step out. And all the people from the northeast are advised to go back. And this again came in the form of WhatsApp communications. And people started leaving. It became such a big thing. All the trains were packed. All the people were falling off trains in their anxiety to get away from Bangalore and from other cities in the south.
Bangalore is a big city. It's the head of the IT sector.
Yeah, it's not like it's the back of the beyond and it's a rural population that was affected. These were all very highly educated people who were, targeted. And the mass exodus left the entire, because there was an entire service industry dependent on these people from the northeast. The shops were shut down, and it led to a lot of chaos in daily life. So, so when you can't think of anything else, you shut down the internet services. Okay. Yeah. First, of course, the government sent out messages trying to counter the rumor, but people would rather be safe than to trust the government. So they still kept fleeing. So then it was decided to shut down services, and that order remained in effect. Slowly, of course, things normalized, but this is what the problem of fake news can do. And in India, no numbers are small. Anything happens, the kind of numbers that are involved are huge. This has been a very, very big thing in India. Again, images from various events are misappropriated and shown as being of something else, inciting communal passions and creating riots. Like they said that there were these images, they said, of Rohingyas killing Indian Hindus, which is not at all correct, which was actually from, I think, from the Middle East somewhere, that image, and they passed it off as something else and generated a rumor. So this is a huge area of concern in India, and government tries to take down content which can be inflammatory and shut down internet services. So media literacy needs to we really improved that way. And the last point I want to make in this presentation is about why Americans should be looking at India. So this is for e-commerce. So of course we are nowhere close to what China is in e-commerce. China is actually accounting for half the e-commerce market globally. India is still early stage, but even being early stage, we are somewhere around $14 billion currently, and we are growing very quickly at 30% compound annual growth rate. And some of the big companies that are involved in e-commerce in India are Amazon and Flipkart and IRCTC, which is a public undertaking. And the thing is that we are, because we are growing so fast, by 2030 we are likely to reach a figure of somewhere close to $200 billion in e-commerce. And since we have our internet growth is projected to rise sharply, mobile penetration is very good, government is giving total support for digital payments, security and access to funding, entry of global majors. All of these are being supported by the government, as well as innovations that are figuring in mobile technology in India. They all make for a very good case for people to look at India as a new market for e-commerce. And we are likely to move into the e-commerce model 2.0, which not only is focused on price, but is also high quality, intuitive, curated and personalized. And we are likely to move towards hyper-local on-demand market because even our hyper-local markets cover a sizable population. So yes, I think e-commerce majors should be taking us seriously. To conclude the presentation, I just request Dr. Sunetra to take you to the last slide.
We wanted to leave some time for questions, so we believe digital is changing the way people live and work in every facet of life, but it's technology and society interacting rather than just technology pushing that. So that seems to be what is happening. We don't really look at it as anything is being imposed on us anymore. We're just too big and too vibrant, and too much of content is being produced for us to assume it's any kind of imperialism. So, but hybridity is really what's happening in all aspects of media. We are combining our own languages with global formats. It sets, I remember reading somewhere a description of India. For example, China, you often call as a dragon or a tiger or whatever. India is often depicted as an elephant. And an elephant could be slow and lumbering. But they say that India's simultaneously present in 3 centuries. The trunk is in 1 century. That is the early adopters, the people who are rich, maybe who are living a different lifestyle. Then the bulk of India is the body of the elephant, which is in 1 century, and the tail is the people who are laggards in the last century. So you find 3 lifestyles of 3 different historical eras, they coexist. For example, people live a certain way in an urban center such as Delhi. You drive out 20 miles maybe in one direction and you'll find a village with people living a completely different lifestyle. And it's not that far, it's not so distant, but these things are happening side by side. So tradition and modernity is kind of, that tension remains, and in many ways it's getting exacerbated with the speed with which digital media is changing the way people interact, live, work, marry, everything. We feel there's going to be more change when more and more of India gets online, especially in vernacular content. Different classes, different genders of people get on the net. We can't really predict what the future will be because the numbers involved are so huge. It's very difficult to say for a macro landscape what's going to happen. Community is definitely kind of getting redefined. The old structures in some way are breaking down. change is happening, and the media is also, the new media is part of that change. In some ways it's good, in some ways it's not so good. It just depends on the context. So it's no point in making a sweeping generalization. It's all there. Everything is coexisting, and it's some ways it's very schizophrenic when you see that the level of change and how everything is happening at the same time. So. That's really it. We can't offer any definite either a theory or a conclusion. We can just give you some of the trends that have emerged from our study, which is again like a tip of the iceberg kind of study. Every chapter in this book, which is an edited book, has a volume of literature which can grow out of that particular question. And this book itself has not even looked at questions such as culture or commerce, because we felt those are so vast that they're the subject of an inquiry in itself. So we'd be very happy to take questions if you'd like to ask.